Hi, everyone, and welcome to this broadcast. Doing another live broadcast with you here today, Mark DeJesus. Welcome to this. I pray that you really get a whole lot out of this discussion I'm going to have. Really, it's a monologue, me sharing with you. But I would like you to sit back and if this subject of OCD is something that you'd like to get some insight or some encouragement and help in, consider us sitting down at the table, and I'm just sharing with you my story and my journey. I give you a little bit of insight into what it's been like working through the issues of OCD, and I pray that what I can share with you today will be an encouragement to your life, to your journey. Before I get into anything that I'm going to discuss, I do want to let you know that if you'd like to support the work that we're doing, you can go to markdejesus.com, click on the donate button. You can do a one-time donation or become a regular supporter. We appreciate that so much. And today what I'm going to get into is my healing and freedom journey with OCD. And I decided that I'm going to make this into two parts. I originally was working on filming this in one big, large segment together, but I'm going to actually film it in two parts. Part one is going to be my journey, what it's been like, and what some of the things I needed to be aware of. And I'm just going to give you some groundwork and understanding so you can gain some insight either into your journey or into someone's life who you're trying to help, or maybe you have a heart to be more helpful, more mindful in this area, in helping people in their journey, in their transformational journey. So just want to help you to be able to be a help in that. Also want to let you know that there is a link that you can use, markdejesus.com, and you can go to OCD help, markdejesus.com, OCD help. Okay? So I'm just going to give, while I have that slide up, just going to give you a minute. I'm going to get started with the main broadcast in just a second. So I'm going to let some people come in so they can be able to tune in. And then I'll officially begin. Going to be starting a talk on OCD in just a minute. Just want to let you know about markdejesus.com, OCD help. And beginning my discussion in just a moment, so stay tuned. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this broadcast. Mark DeJesus here, going to dig right into a subject that is near and dear to my heart. And I pray that it is a blessing for you, for your journey. And I pray that the things that I share here will be a blessing to your life. What I want to get into today is I'm going to get into the subject of my healing and my freedom journey with OCD and what it's been like to work through it, what it's been like to experience healing, what it's been like to work through the issues and the problems that get in the way, and what I've had to really realize and learn. And it's been quite the journey in my life. So I pray that everything I share with you is a help, is a benefit, and is a blessing. And as I mentioned to people earlier on in the live broadcast, if you want to go further, you go to markdejesus.com/OCD help. And this will be a great opportunity for you to take advantage of further help and resources. And what I want to do is just be a resource of encouragement and insight for things that you may need to pay attention to and you may need to work through in your own life and journey. I'm not a doctor, a psychologist, psychiatrist. I have 25 plus years of pastoral experience and pastoral counseling experience and work with people in coaching settings. But really, the biggest area that I want to be a blessing to in your life, in your journey, is my own experience, is my own journey and my own area of where I've had to work through this in my own life, where I've had to understand and identify certain issues that I needed to face in order to heal and overcome. And I want to give you hope up front is that you don't have to be limited by any battle that you face in your life. But what I will say is that through you going through the battle and learning what you need to learn, I really believe that God will not only turn the tables on your battle, but he will take the things that you're struggling through and fighting through and working through, and you'll gain ammunition to help others. I really, truly believe that. I believe that God meets us in these battles that we face, and he wants to help us, and he wants to strengthen us and really teach us how to overcome. And it involves healing of our hearts. It involves learning what love looks like, learning what it means to be loved, to live in love, and to just really understand the root system of the battles that we face. And sometimes I get a little wearied when I hear people giving counsel, advice to things that they've never been through. I'm not saying that they don't know what they're talking about or that they can't help others, not in any way, shape, or form. But I really believe if you haven't come to terms with your own battles, it's going to be hard to really sympathize, empathize, be able to connect with where people are at and what they're going through. And I will never forget many of the deep, dark battles I've had in areas of mental health, be it anxiety or OCD. And I tell you what, when somebody's been through it and they have something to share, I really tune in. Because I believe that through our experiences is where we learn the most. You can only learn so much in a book. You can only learn so much in a video. But when you go through it yourself, you have a lot to offer. So I'm sharing with you here today, really just coming from a place of my journey. And I will say this, when I began to share my mental health journey and began to share how God helped me through those areas, a lot of people in the body of Christ tuned in. Maybe they weren't diagnosed specifically with a certain issue or a certain mental illness, but the principles and things that I brought out, if people are honest and open and hungry, everybody could connect. Everybody could relate to it. And so I found an interesting thing in that. Sometimes I would do a teaching on OCD or do a teaching on anxiety or depression or whatever, and it's like everyone would kind of go, I can find my place in this area. You know, I may not have that particular battle, and you may not have a diagnosed OCD kind of issue, but you can relate to some of the things I'm sharing. You go, you know what, that can help my journey. And I think that could help where I'm at. And so I want you to know your experience is important because as you learn and overcome, you have things to offer and to help others. And I want you to keep that in mind and let it be an encouragement to you. A lot of the emails and correspondence that I get have a lot of obsessive compulsive in them. I do notice the patterns. People are not only struggling with issues, they have like this really intense, narrow, obsessive focus. And I see OCD themes in the way people are dealing with and ruminating over and judging and assessing, and they're trying to figure out, what does this mean? What's this battle? And they spin and they spin and they spin. And what it's revealing the high level of relationship breakdown that we have in our world. And I believe that all mental health stems back to, at least in some areas of our life, not all, not in everything. This isn't like a, kind of, across the board kind of statement. But I do believe that the root system of our mental health battles is how we process relationship, how we process our relationship with God, how we relate to ourselves. Many people don't even know what that even means. And how we relate to other people and how we receive love in our world. Because God created you to be a relational being. And when that's not equipped, when that's neglected, or when there's trauma, when there's breakdown in that, our story gets infected. And of course, it's going to infect how we see and how we relate. And so I'm a big proponent of, you want to focus on things that you can begin to look at that can help you, that can empower you. And one of them is empowering your relationship grid. And so I want to encourage you that what I'm going to share here is going to get back to my relational world, my story, and learning what it means to experience the life that God wanted me to have. I am concerned that we're becoming very obsessive, very impulsive, very compulsive, and at times even neurotic. And I don't say this in judgment. I say this just in concern, is that people are afraid in their own thoughts. They're struggling with what's coming down the pike, and they are having very, very difficult times having peace, having quiet, being able to be at rest. The Bible talks about us having peace, those whose minds are stayed on you. And I think that is an important thing to realize, is that God is concerned about our mental health. And I believe the Bible has a lot to say about it. But I had to have a personal awakening. And approximately 15 years ago, even more to the time of this recording, I had an awakening in my life because the anxiety, because the panic attacks, the depression I was feeling was at an all-time high. Now, looking back, a lot of it was very OCD based, but no one told me that. No one helped me to see that. I don't blame anyone, because for a lot of it too, there wasn't as much insight and understanding of what this looks like. OCD was kind of limited to neat freaks, germ phobes, kind of stuff like that. People who needed everything kind of perfectly in order. They'd go, oh, you're a little OCD there. It's become a cultural term, right, that we use and we kind of throw around. OCD is way more than that. And I hope this will help just in get some clarity. When we're talking about OCD from a basic premise, and in future videos, I'll get more into specifics, okay? But I'll share some basic understandings that we can help to begin the journey and help to begin some insights with. When we talk about an obsession, we're talking about a pattern of intrusive, unwanted thoughts or unwanted emotions. Remember, thoughts have emotions with them. Intrusive, unwanted thoughts or emotions, and they create disturbance within you. Maybe it creates anxiety. Maybe it creates guilt. Maybe it creates a sense of conflict within. Right? And so what happens usually is we get narrowly fixated on the thought because it's very disturbing. It's like, whoa, where's this thought going? What's it doing? Right? It's like, what's this all about? And so then a compulsion comes in. And a compulsion is some kind of act of the mind, some type of action we do, some process we go into to try to neutralize the thought, to neutralize the threat of it. So one, we have a thought, it's unwanted. It's disturbing. It gives a high level of visual to it, maybe in our minds, a video play through it, or there is something, it just creates a disturbance. So it could be something that in the sense of you look around and you perceive your environment. It could be, and it can apply to if something's not clean. You got to always have things clean. You got to always have some things in order. But then there's intrusive thoughts about people, about relationships, about God. And we get into a whole bunch of categories of how those obsessions affect us. The compulsion then is how you try to feel safe. It's the action you take to alleviate the discomfort. Okay, so from a basic standpoint, someone who always needs cleanliness, they see a lack of cleanliness everywhere, and it's intense, and it's intrusive, and it's unwanted, so then they constantly have to clean. Well, at first, you kind of go, oh, that's nice, you're a clean person, that's great. But then that thought process becomes an invasion in their life, and they're constantly doing that. Well, when you get deeper now into what a lot of people battle with OCD, is you get unwanted thoughts And they can fall into the category of religious OCD, about your salvation, about thoughts you have towards God. They can be sexually unwanted thoughts. They can be hurt and harm unwanted thoughts, those kind of things, right? And so now you have these things that you do to try to avoid, or you become afraid of your own thoughts. You become afraid in your own self to take your peace. And it creates a lot of inner torment. And then you can end up in these certain little patterns. I'll get some more into that in just a moment, okay? But the biggest premise that I want to share about my story is I wish that I had insight way back then that I had now. Now, we all have our journey, right? We always say, I wish I knew, how's that song go? Wish that I knew what I know now when I was younger, right? And it's very true. And so I don't say that in regret. I say that in just a compassionate look at what I was battling with. That like, wow, if I understood, I wouldn't have had so much shame over it. Because a lot of shame covers, and I'm doing a series on shame right now in my video content, a lot of shame covers how we process these battles. So you have the battle already, and it's already difficult. But there's shame on top of it. It's like if people knew what I was struggling with in my mind, and sometimes when I would even share it out, kind of get a chuckle from someone, I had a very significant battle with what is called relationship OCD, which means you're constantly in conflict and unsettled about a relationship that you're in. And so it really hindered my dating relationships. And I was a really, really hot mess in this area. And I'm noticing a lot of single people I'm working with have very similar issues in their journey, in their background, that they're struggling with, because we're obsessed about making sure we find the right partner, right? But then we become obsessive about it, so we get these intrusive thoughts, or are you sure you love this person? Do you love this person? Do you not love this person? Are you really? I had a lot of insecurity in that area, right? And I remember when I would share it, one person in particular told me, it was a leader that was in a leadership position in my life at the time. He kind of chuckled and he's like, "You sound like a Seinfeld episode," right? And in many ways, he was right, because I did sound like a Seinfeld episode. You know how the characters in that are so picky and nitpicky, about who they're dating or whatever. I realized that, but then it just added more shame, because I was like, well, wow, I'm just a comic book character, I'm just, that's really all, that this is, and was like, no, I there's got to be more to this. And it took me years and years to realize. My first journey was dealing with the anxiety aspect of my life, because I wasn't very strong in my thought life. I wasn't very strong in how I thought. Many of people I work with and dealing with OCD, they're in the same boat. They don't know how to strengthen good neural pathways, and they don't know how to weaken the unwanted ones, so that they can focus on what they need to and not be tormented by the stuff that then consumes them. And so I had to realize that I needed strengthening in what it means to take thoughts captive, what it means to look at myself through compassion and love. I was very passive. In other words, I approached my day for whatever happened to me. Whatever thoughts came to me, I would just take them in and respond and react to them, and there goes my day. I didn't know how to set my compass. I didn't know how to cultivate an inner thought life that was filled with love and grace. So when these intrusive thoughts would come in, I wouldn't be taken out by fear, but I'd know I was loved, and I know His grace was there. And that took me years and years and years to learn. The good news is that I said, well, this will take as long as it takes. Now, for those of you battling OCD that you're watching this, I pray you get a lot of encouragement out of it. One piece of advice that I want to give you, as you listen to any OCD thing that I do a talk on, don't get hung up on the specific example, because there are millions of examples I could use. I want you to see the parallels. I want you to see what I learned, because many times what I'll do is I'll share, somebody I'm coaching with, I'll share an example of one I struggled with. And many times their response is like, well, I don't struggle with that. It's like, no, you're missing the point. And many times when we're battling OCD, we're looking for the exact same battle. And trust me, other people are struggling with the battle that you have. Trust me. they're struggling with it. It's there. Whatever OCD battle you have, there's other people that have it. You're not by yourself. These battles are not secluded to just you. Many people have it. I want you to hear the heart. So when I share my journey, my story, hear the heart of it, because many times OCD people, they have a lot of stuff they're locked in their brain, but they struggle in connecting to the heart. They struggle in connecting to love, to nurture. And so in my story, allow the story to bring out things that can be helpful, encouraging reminders to you, because the precepts can be applied to anybody, to anything, okay? So when I look at the earliest stages of my journey, I would probably look back and say, one of the earliest memories was that I had a lot of anxiety as a kid. I felt these like dark emotions at times. I felt anxious. And for me, it quickly became an anxiety that would get fixated on certain things. It would get fixated on the future. I developed a worry pattern, a dread pattern, where in a fear-based way, I became apprehensive in checking the future. I was checking the next thing that was happening. Many times because I was nervous about certain things I was involved in. Maybe I was involved in a play and I had a part in a play, right? And I loved acting. I enjoyed it. But there would often be a lot of pressure over memorization or things. I'd have to give a speech in school or something that I was just a part of. And I loved it, but there was pressure. And I didn't handle that pressure well. And so I was left in my own world. So I always had this sense I developed where I would develop a fear of the future. And anytime I'd enjoy a moment, I'd be having fun and I'd just be feeling great, I'd have these intrusive thoughts of something of the future, and I'd start checking, and it would just pull me down. It would pull my day down, and it would pull me into a very discouraged and anxious posture. And so I became very worrisome, and this scanning and this checking would develop into a worsened habit. So there were certain things that were challenges in my life. Like I remember in sports and I joined the basketball team, I joined the soccer team, and I loved being able to participate in it. But there was this pressure, right? And the practices were hard and the running was hard, and it just created a lot of anxiety in me. So what I enjoyed then became an anxiously tormenting thing. And so I would constantly develop this thing of like, okay, when's the next practice? When's the next practice? When's the next game? And I wasn't present in the here and now. I was always projecting into the future. And fear got a hold of me at that age where I would, anytime I was enjoying something, it's like, well, yep, well, what about this thing that's happening? And then this really got into when I would give public speeches or when I started preaching. And I started preaching at a young age. I was preaching to adults as early as 15 years old, and would give presentations, would give sermons and so forth over the years. So by the time I was 18, I had already been speaking a ton. Okay, and I'll talk about that. 17, 18, 19 years of age was an important season of my life. So I do recognize I don't remember having any understanding of how the enemy uses thoughts, right? Understanding that, thoughts are not, thoughts are just thoughts, but the enemy can give you thoughts and wants to try to get you to come into agreement with them. So there's a war over it. Understanding love, perfect love casts out fear. All those principles that I talk about in my book, I Will Not Fear, became a very necessary thing in my journey. And so that was one of the first things that as I began to hunger, and now we're going back to about 15 years ago when I began a renovation journey. It was really understanding how fear works. And I wasn't taught in a very succinct way of how to deal with these fearful thoughts. And what do I do with them? And how can I strengthen my inner world of what I focus on and what my story is? And so fear became a theme of struggle, but then it's also become a theme of me helping others. And it's been an honor to do that because I believe that's how God turns the tables on your battle. He takes what the enemy meant to just steal, kill, and destroy and turn it around. And I would say people that I interact with who have OCD issues do not know what to do with the fear aspect. It just gets more and more inflamed, more and more inflamed. So I had to learn how that God has not given me this chronic anxiety. He's not using it to try to tell me something. He's not wanting me to stay anxious. He's not putting anxiety on me. That's just a bunch of nonsense. But it's so strong. Sometimes you go, man, where's this coming from? And then you just think that you're just pathetic, and then you start beating yourself up and you struggle with depression. I think, and I propose this to, I have the right to be wrong, but I believe a lot of people underneath the OCD, there's some depression there. And they try to, in the OCD, they're trying to fix their thoughts and make all these thoughts better, but really underneath it, they're struggling with depression. They got a broken heart. There's aspects where hope is deferred. They need some healing in what nurturing love means, but they can't see it because they're obsessed with whatever the argument is that they're entangled with whatever kind of disturbing issue. And so for me, I developed this scanning, checking thing. And that's a trait that many OCD people do. They're scanning and checking their environment, scanning and checking a certain issue. So if you have this, you kind of think, if it's a religious OCD, you're scanning and checking. Do I have things I need to repent of? Things I need to pray to? Did I do my religious duty today? Did I check these things off the list? Or it's like, well, my salvation, am I really saved? Am I saved? Maybe I'm not saved. Maybe it's because you're right. So you're checking it. And what happens is, the way that I would teach this when I was a pastor is Jesus said, he who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not fit for the kingdom. And some people take that means, if you put your hand to the plow and look back, you're going to go to hell. That's not what he's saying. And he's not saying you're not good enough. He's saying you're not physically fit for what I have for you. And don't take that in a condemning way. He's like, because in order to walk with God and experience fruitfulness, you have to learn how to focus your heart and your attention on one step in front of the other. And that turning back is that constant checking. It becomes like an introspection. And constant introspection, I believe, can be very dangerous. So even when you experience freedom, you step into freedom and then you check, am I really free? But you take your eyes off the prize meaning the steps that are helping, the things you need to focus on, and you turn, and you're stimulating that old thought, and it grows, and you go, see, I was never free. And so I had to learn how to begin to walk in a new pattern. Now, I also have what I call a fear of evil, because at times I would hear teachings on the enemy or spiritual warfare. In the early stages of life, it wasn't taught a lot in church. And if it wasn't, I'm not sure how helpful it was. It was just kind of like you're in a battle and people are like, oh, the enemy, something bad would happen. You go, oh, the enemy's really trying to discourage us, right? But there wasn't real helpful understandings. And when I try to teach on spiritual warfare, I try to break this down. So we're understanding that the enemy's primary mechanism of trying to steal, kill, and destroy is really through the arena of thoughts. He's trying to, within thoughts, give us a thought, make it sound like it's our own, right? I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. And then at the same time, you develop this fear of evil, we're afraid of the enemy. And so there were times where it was talked about, and it was like, oh, you better watch yourself. And it was talked about in a very superstitious kind of way. And I remember as a kid, I developed a anxiety over an intrusive thought where I thought that maybe I'd asked Satan into my heart accidentally. And to some of you hearing that, you might say, well, that sounds kind of ridiculous. But it's something that I struggled with. And then I said, maybe I did. And then I'm checking and checking and checking. And that thought gets stronger and stronger. When really what I needed to learn was just gently let that thought pass on by. I don't need to give that a thought anymore. But when you're afraid of a thought, it grows. When you're afraid of something, you focus on it and it gets bigger. It becomes the focus of your attention. It's the nature of how fear works. If I'm afraid of something, I'm going to think about it more because it gives me this reaction of fight or flight. I have danger here. I have danger here. Well, you're never to fear the enemy. Never to fear the enemy. But that thought was so disturbing to me. That's like the worst kind of thing you could have is a thought that you would ask Satan into your life, and I was afraid of it. And I was afraid. Now, if you ask some Christians and you brought this to their attention, some would say, oh, you got some issues. We got to pray these things out of your life. And it will make it worse because you go, oh my goodness, I do have this. Oh no. right? So I didn't have any equipping. Now, I'll share this from my childhood. I don't know if some of you can relate to this, but when I was a kid, I don't know what they were thinking. God bless my parents. God bless my parents' generation. I don't know what they were thinking, but they decided it was a good idea to show these end times movies, right? Those of you who grew up in the church or you were around in, I think it was the late 70s, early 80s, A Thief in the Night, A Distant Thunder, Mark of the Beast, right? They're these movies that they showed about the end times to get people, like you got to get ready for the coming of Jesus. The problem is all the kids were sitting in on this, and there's these like disturbing moments of things. People going to prison, they're like a father and a son being in a prison cell, and then all of a sudden a soldier takes the father away, and he's about to get killed, and if I remember, it was like things like guillotines and stuff like that, that were going on. And it was not good for kids to see that. And it gave me a good number of nightmare kind of experiences. And the thoughts that I saw in that movie gave ammunition for intrusive thoughts. And so I remember all the way up until maybe in my late teens, those kind of thoughts would still follow me. That like dread of end time persecution, oh my. And we're never taught in the Bible to be afraid of the future or to be afraid of the times that we live in. Quite the opposite. But how do you know that when you're just a kid and you're just struggling? And I didn't tell anyone about this. I didn't even, and I think shame, that's why I say shame is such a big issue, because shame covers a lot of these areas and makes us feel so defeated, makes us feel so flawed and just our identity, just sinful and unworthy of being loved and being able to feel safe. And so this fear of evil was something that, I needed some help and some insight and understanding, because something I've learned to this day is that we never need to be afraid of the enemy. We never need to be afraid of darkness, because the more you're afraid of it, the more you empower it. Do not be afraid of darkness. The psalmist said this. He said in Psalm 23, I can walk through the valley of the shadow of death and not fear, because you're with me. And in Psalm 139, David says, darkness is nothing to you. It's not a threat. He says, darkness is as light to you. So it's like nothing intimidates God. Nothing limits God, as though darkness is a threat to him. David's like, please, you're so much bigger than all of that. And so, but the way that we get over our fears is not by, I think I can. It's not by like trying to, I'm going to stir up my faith. Although at times that helps. What you need love. You need to learn, only perfect love, the love of the Father, can cast out fear. That's really the greatest power that can eliminate our fears. So take all your anxieties, where your anxiety is, whatever specific thing, fear about your salvation, fear about unwanted thoughts, fear of these intrusive thoughts, fear relation, whatever it is, it shows you that area is an area you haven't learned how to be loved in, and that's your journey. It identifies what you need. And what you need is you need love. You need to learn how to be loved, how to live in love, how to be settled in love. Now, for me, I struggled a lot with feeling far from God. So many believers that write to me, talk to me, interact with me, this issue of not feeling close to God, I get it, because I spent most of my life never really feeling that connection. And OCD people, often what they'll do is they have this like, I don't know, I don't feel like I'm completely settled. And it might be like just a little area in their heart, but they pay attention to it and they expand that. When really they need to learn how to go, no, it's okay. I am close to God. He's near. He's with me. They don't have the ability on how to process through that and how to be able to work through that. And so I had that even in my own life. I had that in my own life where I struggled in what to do with that aspect of my life. I didn't feel close to him. So what happened is it would lead me into self-analysis constantly. I was constantly analyzing myself. I'm analyzing what sins could be in getting in the way, and what do I need to maybe repent of. So I spent a lot of time repenting of stuff that I thought I needed to fix this problem. Because with OCD people, you're constantly in a place where you feel like you need to fix things. You feel like you need to fix these feelings, fix these emotions, fix these struggles, right? Rather than resting in what Jesus did and going, I'm okay, I'm loved. But a lot of struggles were in my life in that area. Just this nagging sense. I hungered after God, and I wanted to do what's right. But I always had this nagging sense I wasn't close to him. And so when I heard other people talk about their relationship with God and how much they pray and how long they pray and how much they put into prayer, I was like, you know what? That's what I need to do. My problem is I need to pray more, or I need to do this more. I need to fast more. And it put me into a lot of patterns that were very unhealthy. And that's because when you're not rooted in the grace and love of God in a powerful way, when you're not rooted in that, in a healthy, powerful way, then here's what's going to happen. Let me say this again. When you're not rooted in love and grace in your life with God, you're going to have a fear foundation. You're going to have a judgment foundation in your life. Shame's going to come in. And so here's what happens. You will do what is right so that you avoid God punishing you. And you don't do what is wrong because you don't want to be punished. So see, you kind of do everything from a punishment perspective, from a punishment basis. And God's wanting you to get free from that. God's wanting you to get free from that kind of perspective and from that kind of foundation. So if you want to get right to a bottom line, if you have OCD, you need a reestablishment of your foundation. It's the foundation that needs work most of all. It's not you getting smart enough. It's not you fixing those thoughts you have. It's about you learning what it means to be loved in a deeper way. And I'm sitting here analyzing, I got to fix this sin. Then at times it would lead me into believing, am I really saved? Did I lose my salvation? Did I ever get saved in the first place? So I would often say the sinner's prayer multiple times, many times. And then I'd be like, okay, now I really mean it. Now I really mean it. Now I really mean it. And then when I got into ministry, I was constantly, when I say ministry, like in a leadership position, a staff position, at first as a youth pastor, then later on I was an associate minister. I did worship ministry, church productions. It's like you're always in this thing where like, oh, not close. I gotta pray so I can get close. If you do any spiritual activity trying to fix something, right, it can lead to some dysfunctional places because a judgment-based relationship is not the way you develop a long-term fruitful relationship with God. He didn't send Jesus on the cross so that you would sit in places of bondage and constantly feeling that you're never good enough. Okay, and so this is really, really important. And that's why I began to develop teachings and insights like on the rejection mindset, because rejection sits at the root. It sits at the root system of these battles when you don't feel close to God. It's rejection just trying to block you, just trying to get you in the way. And for OCD people, their rejection issues really expand. And then you start obsessing about these areas of separation. Or maybe you also do that relationally. You feel like you're not close and connected to another person, so then you obsess over it and you do obsessive things to try to get a sense of certainty about your relationship with that person. And that's a whole other category in itself. But remember, right and wrong, when you, without the love of God, and the grace of God, right and wrong is going to be done based on avoiding punishment. And that's why we have a lot of people in the church like, I do what is right. And right and wrong is awesome. Like, yes, right is right, wrong is wrong. But what happens is when you're not loved and you don't know the grace of God, everything becomes so intensely black and white that you're giving no room for process, for journey, for growth, and you're always disqualifying yourself, and there's always this punishment perspective that's going on. Okay? So then what happens is it makes way for guilt in my life, and I struggled with a lot of guilt. This isn't even really a term, but it's like I had a hyper guilt-ridden conscience. Now, your conscience is your compass of right and wrong in your life, right? And for many of us, we're on our journey, and there's aspects of our life where you're sensitive in your conscience to certain areas. Sometimes it could be for certain battlegrounds, right? And for a person with OCD, they are heavily sensitive to guilt, and they listen to guilt. Because remember, they're not rooted in love. When you're not rooted in love, you listen to guilt. It's the same goes in your relationships, right? If you're not rooted in love, then your thoughts about your relationships are based on, well, I should probably call, you kind of like you do this pressurized, I got to do the right thing. And you're always thinking of the next thing you got to do, but you do it out of guilt. I probably should because I feel bad. But that's not how relationships are built in health for the long term. They're built on love. But when you're not loved, you're always trying to do things right. And it gets haywire, where you're always like, I better do what's right. I hope this makes sense, because it's like you wake up and face your day with, I should do this because it's right, and don't do this because it's not right. That's like going into a marriage and going, okay, I'm going to stay faithful to my wife because that's the right thing to do. Okay, that may get you that past certain things and certain temptations, or maybe if there's a struggle. But really, at the end of the day, you don't cheat on your spouse because you love your spouse. If you're always, I don't want to cheat on my spouse because I don't want to be punished, and that kind of stuff doesn't build a relationship, because now the relationship is based on fear. Now the relationship is based on judgment and punishment, right? So I had to get my foundation relaid. I had to get a whole new foundation laid down, because I realized that I had a very guilt-ridden. So this affected intrusive thoughts. So if I have a thought come down my path across my thinking that was unwanted, then all of a sudden it's disturbing, and I would feel guilty, and I would feel like, oh my, and OCD has this twisted pattern that if you have a thought, it gives you the same feeling as though you committed it, or you're capable of committing it. And so it scares people of their own thought grid. It's like they can't even sit still in their own skin, because you have an unwanted thought. Maybe you have an unwanted sexual thought. That's a common one. You have a sexual thought about a loved one, or doing something sexually harmful to somebody, or that you're a sexual deviant, or some inappropriate act that you would do, or picturing someone naked, or you're standing in line at the store and you imagine yourself like doing something sexually inappropriate to someone. And it creates a great deal of guilt and anxiety, because you go, oh my, I'm capable of this. I'm capable of this. So it makes you afraid of yourself. So how do you heal a guilt-ridden conscience? Well, it has to be settled in the grace and love of God. Otherwise, your mindset's going to be more based on the law, and the law is always disqualifying us. The law is always telling us we never measure up, because our righteousness isn't founded in our performance. It's founded in what Jesus did, and we live from that. And now the emphasis is loving relationship. The emphasis is not trying to make sure you do everything right. Paul says the church got bewitched when they fell into that. And so for OCD people, your whole spiritual foundation needs reconstruction of what it means to be loved. Unconditionally loved right where you are, and to be loved in the grace of God, so that now you can learn what it means to be empowered by his work. And I'll get into more insights on that. But I developed a guilt-ridden pathway, tormented my thoughts, and I developed a guilt confession pattern that became dysfunctional. And this gets into religious OCD and what's often called scrupulosity. Scrupulosity was observed, it goes back to as early as the 1600s, where it was actually like a thing, where in the Roman Catholic Church, they were observing some monks. They were doing rituals to an extreme, or they were like over confessing certain things. They're confessing things they didn't need to, and they're practicing things they didn't need to. They were overdoing it basically. And so in my life, if I had the thought or maybe something that I felt guilty about, I'd feel the need to confess. And I didn't feel like I was able to land until I confessed it. And so at times people would be like, oh yeah, that's great. I'll pray with you, and I was like, oh, it made me feel better. But then over time it was like, wow, I'm doing this a lot. And I've shared in other broadcasts where then even when I got married, I found myself doing that with my wife, where I was confessing certain thoughts, and I would actually in moments go, yeah, this isn't healthy. This isn't healthy the way I'm doing this. And I need to actually starve this and allow God to begin to heal this obsessive pattern. And one of the big remedies for obsessive compulsive is learning to identify what is the obsession and then what is the compulsion. What's the thought that troubles you, and then what do you do to try to fix it? And what really needs to happen is starving that compulsion while learning to be loved. It's actually very similar to what a drug addict does. They have to starve the drug of choice, and in that starvation, fill themselves with the nutrition of God's love and his nurture, so that you become satisfied in what you really need. And so I think it's important. Somebody wrote in the comments, I need perfect love, and Lord, deliver me from a judgmental perspective of myself. So important because OCD people are constantly judging themselves and over-judging. Their first response is judgment. So you have an inappropriate thought. The judgment is, ooh, this is because that's who you are. This came from you, and you're that kind of person. And you're like, oh, and you're tormented in yourself, because most OCD people, the reason it brings up torment is because that's not your heart. That's not what you want. And that's why it creates conflict. If they go, well, maybe I'm a sexual deviant. It's like, well, the fact that you don't want that thought shows your heart. But you're accusing yourself about your heart. And a lot of it has to do with you don't know you're loved and you don't know who you are. So when you don't know who you are, you're just open to all these things that hit you. Because that's the enemy. If you are the Son of God, if you are who you say you are, and he just hits us and bombards us with stuff that creates a lot of torment. Now, in my life, I believe a lot of OCD really fires up in times of transition. I really believe that. That's one of the biggest areas, is that in seasons of transition in our lives. And I talk about transitions, and they are times where you're moving from one stage of life to another. I think the critical ones are between 11 and 13. Because that's like the puberty stage. A lot's changing rapidly. You're growing fast. That was a tough stage for me, emotionally and physically. I had very, very bad growing pains in that time, to the point I'd have to go to the nurse's office. I'd have to go home. I couldn't even do my work and concentrate. My rib cage was just expanding at that time, and it was like I have severe pains all across my rib cage and my bones. People would sometimes get it in their legs, and then emotionally too. There's a lot of stuff that went on family wise. There were some sudden deaths in some relatives. So in the midst of it, I was open season for the enemy to hit me with anxiety and those kind of darker thoughts, and then out of that, me becoming a performer. In other words, me having to do things to be loved, and perfectionism. Got to do it just right. And that becomes a toxic recipe for OCD to begin to have and take shape. So there's puberty, there's graduating high school, there's graduating college, there's getting married, there's having children, there's the children becoming teenagers, there's the children leaving the house. Then you have empty nest season, you have retirement, latter ages. And there's moving geographically, there's moving to a new school, there's a new job, losing a job. All those kind of moments, they become sharp turns. And if you're not equipped for the sharp turns, it's like the Indy race where, man, if you slip on some oil or something, or you're just not prepared for it, and you don't know that turn's coming. You see, professional race car drivers, they have it down where they know the turn's coming, and they're prepared and equipped for it. For most of us, we're not equipped, and this goes back to our father-mother wounds. We're not equipped for those sharp turns. So what happens is we skid out, crash, but then we just kind of get back in the car and just keep going. Now our engine's all messed up, and we're wondering why the car is not working, right? And we're like, man, my car should be better. And OCD people go, man, I need to think better. What's wrong? And it's like the turn. You crashed back there. But they don't often realize it because no one equipped them to identify their emotions. So seasons of transition are often shocking. They're sometimes traumatic. They're rough. A lot of times we just don't have people equipping us in these areas. And so I believe for me, 11 to 13 and 17 to 20 were critical areas where a lot of these patterns formed and begin to fuel. I did not live from being loved. I lived to achieve, to then try to be worth being loved, but it never satisfied, so I had to keep doing it. And so I remember at age 17, I started to get real serious about my life because I fooled around a lot. I was a jokester and, would slack off and stuff. And sometimes I needed someone to believe in me to kind of rein in my potential. And that's a whole nother subject in its own. But I remember in that series, it was good because I was like, I'm going to stop getting in trouble. I'm going to stop, getting called to detention. I'm going to start really living for God. And I think the heart of that was good. The problem is that it just reinforced this: do everything right, do everything right. It wasn't done, and man, you're loved, and I believe in you. It was more like I got to prove myself. So the tricky transition for me in my story was I was heavily involved in our church's youth ministry. And my plan was I was going to graduate high school and I was going to intern with my youth pastor. And then I was going to go to Bible college because something in me, I was like, I need more and more experience, because nothing against Bible school, nothing against college, but that just kind of makes you book smart. You need in the trenches experience. It teaches you the most. And to be honest, it humbles you. People that kind of act like they know it all and have answers for everything, oftentimes they haven't been through something. They haven't been through the trenches. That humbles you, and then that's where you get some real life learning and you get some real life growing. So anyways, in that, I graduate high school, I come back, and I come back from a senior class trip. We went on a trip to celebrate our graduation, and with my classmates, I came back home, and I was ready to start working and to intern at the church. And the youth pastor tells me, I'm leaving. I'm moving on to another position. And I had a panic because I was like, God, I thought I'm praying. I thought I heard from you about me being here, because I had some opportunities to go overseas, and I was going to even go to work with a missionary in Bangladesh, get some experience there, and just serve. And something in my heart, I sensed God directing me on. I want you to stay here. And it's very, very interesting that now I feel like the exact opposite. I'm being threatened in that certainty, right? So that was this season happened so quickly because I went from he's leaving, and he left very quickly. We had a going away and all that. And in the midst of that, the church comes to me. I just graduated high school. I'm now 18, graduating high school. And they say, we're going to take an unorthodox decision because we saw an influx of youth pastors come in and go. They'd be there for like a year and a half, go. And it's like, this needs to stop. We're going to start growing more from within. And we'd like to support you and give you an opportunity and raise you up to pastor this youth ministry, to lead it. And it was like, wow, great opportunity. I'm grateful to this day that so young I got some amazing experiences. But there were a lot of personal, emotional areas that were not tended to that would torment me behind the scenes, emotionally, relationally. So the anxiety would build, the OCD would build. So this pressurized, I got to make sure I do everything right. So I'd have that Remember I talked about as a kid where I would think about things, I would check and have anxiety. So this came in major fashion. My checking was every Sunday and every Wednesday. What was Sunday? Sunday was I had to get up on stage and either give announcements or pray or do something. And I just all week ruminating about Sunday. And then Wednesday night was when I would preach to the youth ministry, and I would be ruminating and in anxiety about my sermon's got to be good enough. And I would do what I call spiritual calisthenics. Meaning it's like, I got to make sure I pray. Maybe I need to fast, and it's like, like somebody who's trying to get healthy and they're just trying everything they can, push-ups and it's like you're all over the place. And I was, very guilt-ridden. I'm going to make sure I'm all clean, make sure my thoughts are clean, everything's good. And what a pressure cooker, because it made anxiety worse in my life. It made it so difficult. It made it such a struggle. And it just ramped up more and more and more into my 20s until later, many years later, I'm like, man, I need help. And I don't know if I can do this anymore. And I remember my thoughts getting so difficult and so challenging for me because I didn't know what to do with them. And I felt so tormented by them. And it wasn't until I was able to go, all right, God, I open myself up to the help that's available. I need to learn. And whatever I need to learn, I'm open to it. And I'm going to trust that you're going to show me. And so I want to give you just a quick overview of OCD, because many of you need to understand this. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. What's an obsession? It's a recurrent, means this thing happens regularly. Persistent thoughts that are intrusive and unwanted. They come flying in and they disturb you. They create alarm, they create a sense of anxiety, guilt, some kind of distress, in your life. So of course, people can have this. You can become very depressed. You can become very discouraged. You can become a lot of things, right? Because there's a lot of shame in this. And there's a lot of different types of obsessions. They're in categories from a basic standpoint. Contamination. Now, in this time of pandemic, in the time of this recording, I believe the world is becoming very, very contamination obsessed in a phobic way. And this is not an argument, about what's the right way to approach the pandemic. What I'm saying is fear is gripping people's hearts. And you can't rationalize with fear. Fear is a bully and has to be kicked out. That's really the truth. So contamination is one of them. Germs, sicknesses, viruses, right? You have these thoughts of being contaminated. Then there's the doubting obsessions about maybe, did I turn the appliance off? Did I lock the doors? Did I close the door? And you have checking. Did I do this? Did I do that? Did I make sure I do this? And it can get into deeper areas that I'll get into, like religious ones. Did I really get saved? Am I saved? Did I really, commit my life to Christ? There's a category of harm where you have thoughts that you're going to hurt someone, that you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt your kids. Boy, that's a really challenging one, because then you go, oh my, maybe I'm capable of this. I'm capable of this. So then it makes you afraid of being around your kids. Because what happens is many times these obsessive thoughts kick up when you're in relationship proximity. If you have inappropriate thoughts about people, they often kick up when you're interacting with them. So I've had a number of different examples. I've worked with the people. Some people came to me, they say, at work, if a female comes to the counter and I'm working with her, I have an inappropriate thought about her or something. And so what happens is they can't even focus. And because they're so troubled by this, what they need to be able to learn to do is let the thought pass on by and not be afraid of it. Because if you're afraid of it, it grows. That which you fear will just keep growing. So when we neutralize the fear, I don't need to be afraid of this thought, it empowers you. Because that's what happens. When you're not afraid of the bully anymore, he no longer has power, because what's the power? The threat. And the thought comes, the thought's just a thought. You'll have every thought imaginable fly by. You'll have all kinds of thoughts fly by. Probably every thought your family tree has ever had, you're going to have cross your mind. But in those moments, a person with OCD struggles. They don't know what to do with this. So so going back, a harm that you'll harm someone, you'll harm yourself. Thoughts like you're driving, you have a thought that you're going to just pull the car off the side of the road and crash. Then we get into the religious thoughts. And I saw this early on in my work with people too, as I'm recognizing my own battles and then helping others. It's this whole thing of like blasphemous thoughts or the unpardonable sin. And I worked with some people that came for prayer ministry because they believed they committed the unpardonable sin. And of course, it's like, if you believe that, well, I'm doomed, right? And they approach those subjects way out of context. Many people struggle with blasphemous thoughts. They're like, I've had people come and they're very ashamedly sitting down and saying, I'm praying, but then I have these naked images when I start praying to God, and they're so inappropriate. And what do I do? So what happens? They stop praying, and they don't want to pray anymore, right? And many times I'll tell them, you know what? I wouldn't want to pray either if that was consuming me. And they kind of look at me and go, wait, what do you mean? I go, because I understand your battle. And so what we want to do is help you not be afraid of these thoughts. They're going to shrink in size. They're going to lose their power, but we've got to do some practicing. There's a lifestyle thing that we're going to shift and change. Okay. And a lot of people didn't really understand, oh, this is an OCD thing. So I need kind of some OCD help. There's those that I've worked with that have religious doubts, meaning that they have doubts about their salvation, doubts about their right standing with God. So they are constantly reevaluating, reassessing. And here's the danger with religious OCD. This is the real danger. We're talking about God, eternity. Where am I going to be for the rest of my life, right? So by the very nature of them, it's like these are important issues. But for an OCD mind, it goes way off the rails. It goes way off the rails. So now they're evaluating stuff they don't even need to evaluate. Am I a Christian? What do I need to repent of? And then when they read the Bible out of context. So scriptures accuse them. And many people with religious OCD have been raised in certain two aspects. They've been raised in legalistic kind of religiosity without grace and love really being understood. Or there's just neglect where they're just not equipped. And they might have been attending a church that taught a lot on love and grace, but they weren't really equipped personally in those areas. And so this is a big, big area, and religious OCD gets into what's called scrupulosity. You can look up those terms, and basically a religious OCD person is consumed. They're consumed with doubts and uncertainty about their standing with God or their faith or their spirituality. Now, we all know there's so much uncertainty, right? And Jesus says we live by faith, which is a substance of things hoped for, the evidence not seen. And it's hard for the OCD mind to kind of land in that pathway because we have a lot of uncertainty in our lives from a natural perspective, right? But we're learning to develop our certainty in God. We're learning to develop our trust in Him. It's a muscle we're exercising, but OCD minds, it's all black and white. And so they're like, it's either all or nothing. And so they're always disqualifying themselves, constantly feeling disqualified. And if you're in that category at all, what you need to rebuild your foundation. And if you keep chasing the arguments, you try to because what happens is we try to attack these religious OCD things with scripture, and we attack, right? And that's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it can be part of the compulsion. Oh, let me get a scripture. Let me get an argument. And the problem is, we have to understand in the battle we wrestle against, Satan is an accuser. And he'll accuse you of anything that'll stick, right? Anything. And he's just, anything about your past, present, any thought that's flying by, he'll accuse you with it. God's not accusing you with it. So you don't fight these thoughts by trying to match pound for pound, to use a boxing term, to punch for punch, try to do it. No, you don't argue with the prosecutor. You allow what Jesus did in His love and His grace. What you need is love. What you need is nurture. What you need is to experience the Father's love and rely on the work that Christ did for you. And so, religious OCD people, I speak to your hearts. I'm going to do videos just on that subject. Okay? Then there's sexual inappropriate thoughts. It's a major one, right? Because many of you, were taught, if you grew up in church, you're taught this is the right way to live sexually, and this is wrong. The problem is most of the time was spent on all things sexual that are wrong, and you weren't taught in how to deal with your thoughts. Let me ask you a question. Who taught you about sexuality? Who taught you about appropriate sex? And for most people, it's like, no one. And your first understanding of sex was seeing a pornographic magazine or an assault or a moment where you're walking down the street and somebody whistles at you. Like, that's not a way to be introduced to understanding sexuality. So with all that going on, it's like, where's our equipping? So then we have these sexually inappropriate thoughts. They scare us. Okay? Then there's relationship OCD, where you become consumed about the substantiation or you need reassurance about a relationship. This can fall into codependency too. You can be very codependent in your relationships because you need a constant reassurance of the standing of the relationship to make sure that you're okay. I'll get into that in just a second because I'm going to talk about my personal ones. Then there's the inappropriate, disturbing thoughts in general of any kind. And then sometimes what's called pure O. You can look this up. There's some practitioners that don't see any point in this, but I personally, it makes sense to me because what it's saying is it's saying that the compulsion and the obsession are both in your head, meaning that you have this intrusive, unwanted thought, and then you're kind of like spinning with it just in your head. And I've actually worked with people, but that's where it is. And if you probably relate to them, they're not really present. They're never really present. They're locked into some argument they're having with themselves. So pure O means purely obsessional, where it's like what they're trying to say is it's purely just an obsession thing. I would say the compulsion's there. It's just all in here. So they have this thought, and then they have this mental hula hoop they go through in their mind to try to find safety. And maybe it worked a couple times, but now they're locked into a pattern. They can't seem to find true freedom in that. Okay? So this just helps to give just a foundation so that you're understanding. Now, compulsion, these are the routines, the behaviors, or mental acts to reduce anxiety, to reduce your guilt, to reduce discomfort, kind of to neutralize it. This is disturbing me, so I neutralize it. So maybe it's washing or cleaning. Remember what I said, the checking thing. I had a compulsive thing of checking. Always checking. Compulsion is to fix. Oh, that's a bad thought. I need to fix that. I got depression. I need to fix this. I've got this thing. I need to fix this. I had that bad intrusive sexual thought. I need to fix this. Or constant over-analysis. In the religious area, you need, in your spirituality, constant confessing, repenting, praying, religious things, maybe fasting. I've worked with people where I felt their patterns were very OCD. I'm not sure they realized it at the time, but they'd go into these intense fasting routines. They'd go for 40-day fasts all the time. They'd be emaciated, and they're trying to get a move of God to work in their life. They're trying to get something to happen. That takes self-awareness, and it takes someone usually having to say, hey, this is much. This is a bit much, and it's disturbing health in your life. Reassurance seeking. You got to talk it out, right? Reassurance, trying to get that reassurance about your relationship with God or relationship with somebody, or, I'm okay, right? That's that lack of nurture coming up, because nurture helps us to put perspective over our situation, over our battles. Fixing the mental argument. I got to fix that. So let me look up some scriptures and fix it, right? And understand, I'm not saying don't look up scriptures, but it can be your compulsion. And then you're not taking scriptures into context. So you're spinning, you're ruminating, or maybe just an excessive talking out. I found that I did that a whole lot. I did excessively talk something out to feel like I was landing. I even had, these guilt confession things where I remember years and years ago, even in my pastoring, there were times I'd go to someone and I would say, if there's anything I've done wrong, please forgive me. If I offended you, hurt you in any way. And they'd be like, no, you haven't done anything. You're fine, Mark. But their response would give me like just a moment of like reassurance. So it would feed that monster, and I'd do that with other people. And then over time, it was like it wasn't fulfilling it anymore. And a lot of people with OCD recognize that. They'll kind of keep doing, they'll do it, it makes them feel better, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. And now they're really tormented and struggling with what to do. So so my growing OCD issues, I feel like I just lost my place for I was going back to my areas. So a lot of the areas I struggled with, the growing OCD struggles showed up in like my sermon preparation. I like felt like this really, really intense kind of preparation that I need to fall into. At first, it was like, wow, this is my thing and my routine. More and more and more, it would get more and more intense, more and more intense. And there's like an anger, like a perfectionistic anger I had about myself in it, right? And sometimes that anger can make for good preachers, but it doesn't make for good peace. And I remember one time in particular, it was when it was getting to an all-time high. I remember just sitting in a room for hours praying, and I was throwing up. I was nauseated. The fear was so tight around me. So remember, I was always checking for the next thing. The next time I had to preach, the next time I had to speak, just tons of anxiety around it. Obsessive guilt and anxiety over like even conflicts in the church. I would just spin about people that were unhappy with me or maybe I thought didn't like me. I would have this OCD kick up about major decisions. I would make a major decision, and then I would feel like I got to change my mind because this anxiety would come in as soon as I made the decision. That was tough at times. And some people would tell me, "Oh, you're just hearing from the Holy Spirit." God love them, but they didn't realize it just made those OCD patterns worse. And my wife and I talk about this where we'd obsess over certain conversations, and then you're replaying the conversation, and sometimes you feel the need to go back and fix things you said wrong. Now you live a life of editing. One of the ones that I want to get to and just share before I get into closing this first video is relationship OCD. And this was the most tormenting for me. And the reason it is because it didn't allow me to be able to enjoy committed dating relationships where I wanted to get married, but my biggest fear was marrying the wrong person. And when I was working on church staff in a pastoral staff capacity, I saw so many marriages that didn't go well. And I saw behind the scenes to a lot of marriages too. And it was like, man, like the roommate syndrome was everywhere. And so I had this like really intense, unrealistic perspective that God was going to make me feel perfectly right about this person. And if there was any uncertainty, I would focus in on that, and I couldn't handle that uncertainty. And I'll talk about in the second video, follow up to this, about how OCD people do not know how to handle any measure of uncertainty. It torments them. So they feel this like they're in a relationship and they're like, oh, I just don't, something, right? But that's the way Christians often describe, we get a check from the Holy Spirit. I just have a check on that, right? And we say, oh, okay, we need to follow that. Well, if you're OCD, you're always having that, and it's going to keep happening in other areas. And so when you're in a relationship OCD struggle, you become consumed about the doubts. You become consumed about the uncertainty. Do I really love this person? Am I compatible? Am I really attracted? It becomes so intense. And so for me, I would it'd be a nice young lady and we would start dating, and then I would be having panic attacks and anxiety all day. And in some relationships, it was just like a constant nightmare. Couldn't settle. And it was very embarrassing. That's why I do a lot of work on removing shame, because what really hindered me the most was it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing that I struggled with that and couldn't settle and just enjoy a relationship and see what happens, see what God does. I had to no, is this person the one? Like, wait, you're on your first time going out. Like, you got to relax, buddy. Right? And it created a lot of shame internally. And it created a lot of shame because then over time, people would see that pattern and they would think that the pattern was, I'm just, playing on women's emotions. And it's like, now I got a broken heart. And it took me a while to realize that. And I thank God that when Melissa came into my life, I was at a place where I was working on stuff. I had invited the renovation to take place in as early as 2000, 2003, 2004, and it was doing some work. And so when I met Melissa in 2005, I had been doing some work in my life. And I'm talking renovation work, not just patching the holes in the wall. My understanding how to receive the love of the Father, how to receive the Father's love, and being able to embrace that and receive that. And I'm thankful for her because she had her own set of OCD issues, but she loved me through it because she knew, though, here's the thing. She knew I wanted to walk in freedom. She knew that these patterns I had were not me, but I needed to learn how to overcome them in the love of God. And so I'm thankful. And it took some work. It took some learning. It took starving the compulsion, because my compulsion was I got to get out of this relationship because God's leading me out. Now, that's a pretty intense kind of belief statement. I got to get out because God's leading me, because I attributed the anxiety to God's not letting me go into this. And that's how my twisted thinking. That's why in OCD, we have to have a foundational overhaul. This is not your thing. That pathway is going to get fixed. And that's the myth. If I just had this OCD thing stop, I'd be okay. Nope, another one will develop over here. Because OCD is like whack-a-mole. You know that game whack-a-mole? Those things pop up and you go boom, boom, boom. And that's what OCD is like. You're just going like this. So what I encourage people to do, if you're looking at a real machine, is I go, here's how you solve it. And I go around the back of the machine. I unplug it. And they go, wait a second. You can do that? Yep. Game's over. Unplug it. We're not going to chase. So, in any encouragement to you, we're not going to chase your OCD. If your OCD is, am I really saved? Okay, let's see if you're really saved. If I detect the OCD pattern, we're going to go a different way. We're going to go, so how do you experience love in your life? What's unconditional love been like for your life? How'd your father raise you, mother raise you? Now, they want me to go down, are you really saved? And I know they've exhausted that and it's not working, because really what their heart has no reference for is love. And when I invest into the love pathway, I find it every time blank in what it means to be loved. Blank. Raised in the church even, blank in what it means to be loved. And when your love tank is empty, you are vulnerable to so many of these battlegrounds. And that's why I like to help people get to the root system. Now, I would sit there and obsess over, is this woman right for me to marry? Is this woman right for me to marry? Is this woman right for me to marry? And that wasn't the issue. The issue was I didn't love myself. And someone told me that. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm fine with me. I just wasn't aware yet. I was still living surface. On the outer, I hadn't allowed the work to go to the core, to the heart. And really, I had a broken heart. I didn't know what love was. And religion had come in and made me a performer, do good things for God. And I never knew what it meant to be unconditionally, totally loved by God in my life, and to know the love of the Father. Amazing, right? Amazing. You could grow up in church. My earliest memory, and God bless my parents and their generation, they gave what they were given. But there wasn't a deep understanding of the love of the Father. And being equipped as fathers and mothers to nurture and to teach our children, not just right and wrong, to teach them what love is. Right and wrong has to be done in the context of loving relationship. Then there's a whole slew in the body of Christ that you've been neglected. And that neglect has left you empty. And then there's people who've been traumatized and there's abuse and all this stuff, and it's kept in shame and silence. And you've got these OCD things flaming because your OCD, here's I'm speaking to you. Your OCD path, yes, you. Your OCD pathway is a cry of your heart to try to feel safe. And it looks to that specific thing to fix it, to feel better. Sometimes I feel it's almost like a self-sabotaging thing. The OCD thing kicks up so you feel like you have something to focus on to fix so then you could feel better. I hope you're getting this. I hope you're getting this. So instead of being paralyzed by this anxiety, I let the perfect love of God, and I would just practice day in and day out. And I remember that anxiety kicking up in me when I was dating Melissa, and I was like, I can't let this win again. I've seen it done lead me in some bad patterns where I almost lost my mind. God, I'm going to invite your love. And here's the mindset that I took on. God, I'm going to invite your love, and I'm going to learn to practice being loved and loving. Not lust, not a rush, because I don't know many OCD people. You got to realize your frame of reference for love is lust. You may or may not know that, but you have some addiction issues you need to be aware of too that make you fall into those patterns. You've got a low sense of how you feel about yourself. So love needs to be this burst, this dopamine rush. It's not. Love is grounding. It's settling. It's stabilizing. And that sounds boring to people that have lust issues. So they don't know what love is. Or they get a burst and they think that's it, and then they don't have it, and then they're open season. I had to allow God, as I learned to relate to my wife in a way that's unselfish and loving. Because there were times where my OCD would consume our discussion and it become all about me. Me, Mark. And I had to change that and get out of my head and be like, this isn't all about me. I got to learn how to love her. I got to learn, and then we got married, I had to learn how to love her as Christ loved the church and humble myself under the hand of God and love her in that sacrificial kind of way, because OCD will make you very self-consumed. It won't let you love yourself, because when you love yourself, the love flows through you selflessly out to others. But there's a disconnect in what that means. So if you identify your OCD, identify it. And this is a helpful thing to understand. What is your obsession and what do you do? What's your compulsion you tend to follow into? This is self-awareness. And it might be helpful to even journal that. Put it on a piece of paper, and I will look at everything there and will say this. These are all areas you need to learn to be loved in. And what does love do? Love doesn't first try to fix you. Love brings you into relationship. And in that, you get insight. In that, along the journey, OCD people are obsessed with fixing. And so I had to learn how to deal with the intrusive thoughts, with the guilt confession that was going on in my life, constantly editing my life as I was going. I remember one time I fell into a really bad trap in this, because I was preaching one time while editing myself at the same time. Now, I'm gonna teach you something about your brain, because I'm a writer. When you first write a book, you don't write and edit at the same time. You just let it flow. There's a saying that they say in writing circles. Let me see if I can say it right. You write like a drunkard. You edit like a surgeon. Okay? What it means is like this. You you write like a drunkard, meaning like everything just kind of flows. You just kind of vomit it all out on paper. But then you edit like a surgeon with precision. Because, why is that? Because the writing is just the expression, you're flowing. It takes a certain part of your brain. The editing is analytical. Okay? Problem is, OCD people, the editing is always overriding. So I'm preaching and I'm editing what I'm saying while I'm saying it. I barely got through the thing. Thank God for his grace. Barely got through that night. I went home just like, I was evaluating each thing I said. No, you should have said it like this. You should have said it like that. The whole time. And many people do that even relationally. They do that in their life. The edit is always on. And if your edit is always on, you'll never truly live. You'll never truly love. You'll never be loved. If you're always editing and fixing and trying to fix and analyze and checking, that creative part, because that creative part, the right like a drunkard that I'm talking about, I'm not telling you to get drunk. I'm just understand the metaphor. Is there's that creative side, heart, expression. It doesn't happen. Because God wants to relate to all of you, and he'll use all of you. Your strengths, your weaknesses, even your sins. He's going to use the full package of who you are on a journey to show his glory. Remember, he told the Apostle Paul, I'm going to show myself in your weaknesses. And Paul's like, what's that all about? And then Paul turns to go, I boast in them. I boast in these weak areas. I boast in these areas. And so in OCD, there's no room for weakness. You think everything in black and white. And so in closing, I'm going to do a part 2, and I'm going to talk about, I narrowed it down. I'm going to show you 10 things. I'm going to show you 10 things in the video that were overall helps in me beginning to walk into freedom. And I'll post that very, very soon. Hope to get to it today. But what was helpful was realizing how much OCD had infected everything, but realizing I had a sensitive heart. And so I'm sensitive to certain things. I'm sensitive in my thoughts, and not every thought is something I need to give attention to. I think deeply about things, so my emotions can get easily pulled sometimes into anxiety or into guilt because I'm a feeler. And I also realized, too, as I appreciated how God wired me, there are amazing gifts, passion, and abilities underneath all of that. Because even though I had very deep obsessive tendencies, as God is healing that, I have an incredible ability to narrow in my focus. So I can sit down and I can write something for hours at a time. I can sit down and give someone my full undivided attention in a coaching session. I can sit down. It's like I can block everything away. But what happened before is I would get OCD and so narrowly focus on something that was tormenting me and just spinning about that all day long, never really being present. As God's healed my heart and helped me to understand love and help those pathways and those compulsions to die over time, my ability to focus has been strengthened. And so, see, because for many of you, you look at yourself with such contempt. I had to learn to see myself through love. And so there's some recommended, people say, where would I start? I'll get into that some more in some other videos, but really it started with understanding the love of the Father. I had to really understand what it meant to receive the Father's love and relate to him as a dad and allow him to heal those areas. And now, I talk about this in Experiencing God's Love as Your Father. I also get into it too in my book, The Heart Healing Journey. And in fact, The Heart Healing Journey has prayers at the end in the course. Volume 1, the e-course is free. So you can access that. And at the end, there's even some audio where I pray the heart of a father over your life. My wife prays the heart of a mother over your life, to help work in areas that maybe are areas that need some nurture, that need some healing. So for me, the love of the Father was really a beginning point. Then also recognizing that rejection root. And so in many ways, the journey of healing follows my book sequence in what I recommend here. And because the rejection root was important, because I always felt far from God. I was a performer, lived in spiritual slavery and not in sonship, didn't know who I was. And God helped me to build that in my life. And then, as I mentioned, the book, I Will Not Fear, because you need to gain a sense of how to deal with fear and how to overcome in those areas. And then a real game changer for me is the journey of truly understanding what it means to love myself the way that God loves me. And that is where the book, God Loves Me and I Love Myself, came about. A lot of Christians can be very uncomfortable with this subject. They think self-love is narcissism. They think self-love is selfishness. That's not love. That's not love. And I talk about the flow of love and what it means for you to see yourself. So many people have just been ignoring and not even looking at themselves in the name of love, but they've neglected to learn how to receive love from God. So this subject became a game changer. It actually became a game changer in my ministry, because while I was writing a lot of those books, I'm still working through some areas. I mean, I'm always working on areas. I'm always working. So don't, this is never about arriving. It's about just plugging in for the journey. But this, I will say, this book was a turning point in how I see everything in life. And it became a major, major focus of how to encourage people in their journey. And so so people say, well, where do I start? I definitely start with the Father understanding, but pay attention to what seems to bubble up. What seems to bubble up and what seems to stick out. And allow yourself to go, all right, God, I'm gonna pay attention to that area and let you work on my heart, because it's your heart that needs healing. It's not your mind that needs healing. It's your heart that needs healing. And that's an important thing to understand. Jesus didn't come to heal the brokenheaded. He came to heal the broken heart. When your heart gets renewed in love, it shifts how you see everything. So I appreciate that. Now, many of you are just giving some great comments. Yes, so this video will remain up. I did give this before, and it was deleted because the video quality wasn't good. I think I'm having a little bit of trouble in this feed too. Something's taking place because all my settings and everything look great, but something in YouTube is saying that there's an issue. So we're trying to make sure all our settings are in agreement with that. So if this broadcast was flaky or glitchy, we'll look back over it. And we did put down a recording of it on our hard drive here, so I can always upload that. So that's what I'm hoping will take place. But the plan is, yes, to leave this up as a resource. Some good comments here I just want to look at. I grew up with fear of doing anything wrong. If I tried a cigarette, I was going to go to hell. As time went on, I wound up doing it anyways, right? I hear you. Then the devil would use it to condemn me now. Now cigarettes are like medicine, and the only thing that calms down my anxiety or Asperger's or whatever. Yeah. The behind that addiction to cigarettes is a need for love, specifically a need for nurture. And, that whole, action is a longing for nurture and calming. And so I've helped some people break cigarette habits and helping them to understand their nurture issues. I can sort of feel the heaviness on your struggles while you're telling them. Good. Well, I just want to be able to share my heart. This was me with my current boyfriend. Broke up with him the first time because I wasn't aware that it was OCD. I hear you, and I'm hoping I can bring some illumination to that. That is a revelation to see that OCD can be confused for that check in your spirit. Yes, there's that stuff of like, oh, my gut is telling me something. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you're very anxious prone, that gut can be just always fear. And in fact, anxiety manifests often right here in your gut. You have a nervous system that surrounds your stomach. It's called the enteric system, and a lot of anxiety affects your gut, your GI, and everything like that. So we're talking about, I have that sense, right? And it's like, well, it could be just fear. And it could be OCD kicking in. Thank you for sharing all this. Some of it must have been hard to talk about. It's appreciated and so helpful. I think that when I'm emotionally sharing this stuff, I never want to forget what it was like being in the trenches. Like, I never want to just, okay, moving on, and I think that works to my benefit, because when I'm sitting down with someone and they've had OCD for 10 years and nothing seems to help, it's like, I'm not in a hurry to fix you, because I know what it's like to be in those trenches. And love isn't in a hurry. And you'll figure out what you need to figure out when you need to figure it out. What you need to do is get yourself into places where you're being taught, where you're being encouraged. And the nature of OCD is addictive. It's intense. It's pressurized. Fix now. Got to fix this thing. And for many people, starving the compulsion is like withdrawing from a drug, right? And they're like, I need this fix, and it's never going to change. And they struggle with that. It's never going to change. No, it can't. It's a lie. It's not even It's not even scientifically true. Any thought you have can be changed. It just, as it slowly dies out, a new one needs to form. And it has to be done in the love of God, that you're loved. It's really hit me today. No grace, no mercy, religious condemnation, not knowing how to process and heal my heart. Exactly. Yes, I have to constantly tell myself I love God because the OCD tells me I don't love God and I'm a hypocrite. So therefore I have okay, so that's a good example right there. You have a thought that says you don't love God, so the compulsion can be, I love God, I love God, no, I love God, I love God. And what you have to do is you have to let go of that compulsion to have to keep saying you love God. And instead, what I would recommend is learning to receive love. That I am, something that I have people say, I call it TULA, T-U-L-A, total, unconditional, loving acceptance. And it goes like this. I lovingly, unconditionally, let me say it again. This is what I usually do when I say, I 100% totally and unconditionally, lovingly accept myself right where I'm at. I 100% totally and unconditionally, lovingly accept myself. There's the TULA, total, unconditional, loving. So I 100% totally, unconditionally, lovingly accept myself right where I'm at. And I would sit there and I would just say that to myself lovingly, not in like a regimented, I lovingly, no. I want to engage that with my heart. Now your OCD thoughts will go, well, what about this? What about this? No, I'm loved right now. I'm loved right now. And so that's the pathway of healing, is starving the compulsion. I don't have to confess. I don't have to do these hula hoops. I don't have to say these things. And at the same time, learning to be loved and love yourself and nurture yourself with, I'm okay. I'm okay right now in the midst of this. Lord, help us all to know the love of the Father. Yeah, and I pray this is a blessing to your life and to your journey. So I'm going to bring this to a close right now, and I pray you are able to get the heart of this and be able to experience it in fruitful ways. And like I said, I'm going to do a part 2 of this. Stay tuned, because that's going to get posted. If this has been a help, please share it with others, comment on it, and I look forward to helping you in future resources. Thank you so much. God bless you.